If you suddenly had $100,000 in your account, what would you actually do with it? Would you throw it into Bitcoin and hope it goes to the moon? Leave it sitting in a savings account earning almost nothing? Or follow the advice everyone gives and put it all into an S&P 500 index fund? Well, there is no single best investment, only investments that sit at different levels of risk and reward. Some assets are meant to protect money, others to grow it slowly, and some that are basically high-risk bets with huge upside and huge downside. So, in this video, I'm going to zoom out and show you the complete map of every major investment asset, from the safest places to park money, all the way to the riskiest assets with the highest potential returns. Welcome to Martic Finance, where we explain investing concepts in a simple way. But first of all, a quick disclaimer. This is not financial advice. Before we start placing assets on the map, we need to understand one simple rule. As I told earlier, every investment lives on a trade-off between risk and reward. Risk is the probability of losing money or experiencing uncertainty in returns. Reward is the potential gain an investor expects in return for accepting that risk. Higher potential reward requires higher risk, while lower risk investments tend to deliver smaller, more stable returns. There are no reliable exceptions to this rule. Risk also comes in multiple forms. First is volatility, which measures how much an asset's price swings up and down over time. Second is drawdown. This is the decline from an asset's peak to its trough. It's the worst-case scenario if you happen to buy at the very top. Third is the time horizon. This is the one most beginners overlook. Volatility and drawdown become much less dangerous the longer you hold. There's also a fourth type of risk, liquidity risk. Some assets, like real estate or private equity, are difficult to sell quickly. You might own $1 million in property, but if you need cash by the end of the week, you're out of luck. One more thing before we move on. When you look at any investment, you're looking at an expected outcome, but actual outcomes can look very different. An asset might have an expected return of 8% per year, but in reality, it could lose 20% one year, gain 30% the next, and then do nothing for 3 years. The reward is never guaranteed. The only guarantee is that you're taking the risk. So if risk is everywhere and you can't avoid it, how do smart investors protect themselves? They don't avoid it. They use diversification. Diversification works because of something called correlation. Correlation simply describes how one asset moves in relation to another. If two assets move in the same direction at the same time, they're positively correlated. If they move in opposite directions, they're negatively correlated. And if they move independently with no clear pattern, they're uncorrelated. By combining assets with low or negative correlation, investors can reduce overall portfolio risk without necessarily reducing expected returns. Now that we understand what this important terminology means, we can start placing assets on the map, beginning at the lowest risk end of the scale. This first category is capital preservation. These assets are designed primarily to protect purchasing power and provide liquidity, not to generate high returns, and these often struggle to outpace inflation over long periods. Minimal volatility, limited upside, and extremely high liquidity. Cash, savings accounts, and money market funds are on this category. Next on the list are government bonds from developed countries, such as US Treasuries, UK gilts, and German bunds. At their core, a bond is simply a loan. You lend money to the government, and in return, the government commits to paying interest and returning your principal on a fixed schedule. For stable and developed governments, the risk of default is extremely low. That means if you hold the bond to maturity, the expected outcome is largely predictable, even if the bond's market price fluctuates in the short term. Compared to cash, these bonds usually offer slightly higher returns. The trade-off is modest volatility and reduced liquidity over the life of the bond, since your capital is tied up for a defined period. A variation of this category is Treasury Inflation Protected Securities, or TIPS. TIPS are designed to protect against inflation by adjusting their value as prices rise. The goal isn't high returns, but making sure your money doesn't lose purchasing power over time. Moving slightly up the risk spectrum, we enter the low-risk zone. These assets are still about stability, but now you're accepting a little more risk in exchange for better returns than government bonds. First up are high-grade municipal bonds. These are loans to state and local governments, usually used to fund things like infrastructure and public services. When they're high quality, the risk of default is low, and in many cases the interest is tax-advantaged, which can make them especially attractive after taxes. The trade-off is slightly higher credit risk compared to federal government bonds. Next are investment-grade corporate bonds. Instead of lending to governments, you're lending to large, financially strong companies. Because companies are riskier borrowers than stable governments, they have to pay higher yields. That means better income, but also more sensitivity to economic slowdowns. Finally, there are short-duration bond index funds. These funds spread your money across many different bonds that mature relatively quickly. Because those bonds don't last very long, their prices don't swing as much when interest rates change. And since you're not relying on just one bond, a single bad outcome won't sink the whole investment. As we move further up the map, we enter the moderate risk category. This is where volatility becomes real, drawdowns matter, and outcomes depend much more on timing, economic conditions, and interest rates. Let's start with high-yield corporate bonds, often called junk bonds. These are issued by companies with weaker balance sheets, so default risk is higher. In exchange, investors are paid much higher yields. They tend to do well when the economy is strong, but during recessions, losses can pile up quickly. That makes them behave more like a mix between bonds and stocks. Next are emerging market sovereign bonds. Here, you're lending to governments in developing countries. Yields are attractive, but they come with additional risks: political instability, currency risk, and weaker institutions. Now let's talk about bond duration because this is what surprised a lot of investors. Medium duration bond funds are moderately sensitive to interest rate changes. These funds typically have a duration of 3 to 7 years. If you still don't know what duration means, don't worry. I've already uploaded a full guide to bonds in the description. But basically, duration simply measures how sensitive a bond is to interest rate changes. The higher the number, the more the price will swing. To show you how that works, imagine a fund with a 5-year duration. If interest rates go up by 1%, the value of that fund would likely drop by about 5%. On the flip side, if rates fall by 1%, your fund's value would jump up by 5%. Long-duration bond funds, however, sit right on the edge between moderate and high risk. These bonds have cash flows far in the future, which makes them extremely sensitive to interest rate changes. And 2022 was a perfect example of that risk becoming very real. The longest U.S. government bonds with maturities of up to 30 years lost roughly 39% in 2022. That's a drawdown many people never expected from safe government bonds. This wasn't credit risk, it was interest rate risk. And it showed that long-term bonds can behave very differently from short-term bonds, especially in rising rate environments. And finally, there's real estate. This asset sits in this category because outcomes vary widely. Returns depend on many factors: location, leverage, interest rates, local job markets, property management, and timing. Some properties provide steady income and inflation protection. Others can underperform for years or suffer large losses during downturns. Unlike stocks or bonds, real estate is illiquid and highly individual, which makes risk harder to measure, but again, very real. Now we move into the high-risk section of the map, where growth is the priority and volatility is expected. Let's start with stock index funds. Broad market index funds already sit firmly in the high-risk category because equity prices move constantly and drawdowns are unavoidable. But even within stocks, risk isn't uniform. As you move from large-cap companies to mid-cap and then to small-cap, volatility increases. Smaller companies tend to grow faster, but they're also more sensitive to economic shocks, tighter credit conditions, and recessions. That means higher upside and deeper potential drawdowns. Next are blue-chip individual stocks. These are large, well-known, profitable companies with long track records. They're generally more stable than smaller companies, but they're still fully exposed to market risk. Their prices can fall sharply during market downturns, even if the business itself remains strong. Owning individual stocks also adds concentration risk. Unlike an index fund, a single bad outcome can materially impact returns. Then there are real estate investment trusts. These offer exposure to real estate with liquidity similar to stocks, but that liquidity comes at a cost: higher volatility. They are especially sensitive to interest rates. When rates rise, valuations often fall, even if the underlying properties are performing well. So while they generate income and offer real estate exposure, they behave much more like equities than traditional property ownership. At the far end of the map, we reach the extremely high-risk category where uncertainty is highest. Returns can be extraordinary, but losses can be permanent. First are small and mid-cap individual stocks. Unlike small-cap index funds, owning individual companies at this size adds significant business and concentration risk. A single mistake can lead to severe losses, even if the broader market is doing fine. Next are leveraged index funds. These products use borrowed money and derivatives to amplify daily market movements. That means gains are magnified, but so are losses. Over time, volatility decay and compounding effects can cause returns to diverge sharply from what many investors expect, especially in choppy markets. Then, there are options and futures. These aren't traditional investments. They're contracts that bet on price movements. They can be very powerful, but they're also very risky. Even small moves in the market can lead to big gains or wipe you out completely in a short amount of time. In some cases, losses can even exceed the initial investment. Finally, there's private equity and venture capital. These involve investing in private companies, often early-stage businesses. The upside can be very large, but the risks are substantial. Most investments fail, capital is locked up for years, and returns depend heavily on timing and access to quality deals. Liquidity is low, and outcomes are highly uneven. A small number of winners drive most of the returns. And for those who kept watching the video until now, we also have another special category: alternative or niche assets. These can be used for diversification, hedging, or speculation, but only with a very small portion of your portfolio. Each comes with its own unique risks. First, there's gold and silver bullion. These are physical metals that hold value over time and can protect against inflation. Prices can fluctuate moderately, but their main purpose is to preserve wealth rather than generate huge gains. Next, we have cryptocurrencies. These are digital assets with very high growth potential, but they're also extremely volatile and exposed to regulatory changes, technology risks, and market sentiment. They can deliver big returns, but losses can be just as dramatic. Then, there are structured products. These are financial instruments built on other assets, like stocks, bonds, or derivatives. The risk and return vary widely depending on how they're designed. Some are fairly safe, while others are essentially high-stakes bets. Finally, we have collectibles, art, and rare assets, things like fine art, classic cars, or rare coins. These are highly illiquid, meaning it can take a long time to sell them. Prices are subjective, so value depends on market demand. They can deliver impressive long-term returns, but there's also a real chance of losses if interest fades. Now that you've seen the complete map of every investment asset, the big question is, how do you choose the right ones for you? Well, it really comes down to your goals, your timeline, and your risk tolerance. Do you want to preserve capital? Or are you aiming for moderate growth with manageable risk? Maybe you're focused on long-term growth and can handle volatility. These are questions only you can answer. If you'd like, let me know in the comments. I can make a follow-up video diving deeper into some of these assets. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye.